The hot summer wind whipped at Beatrice Vaughn's face as the stagecoach rumbled to a stop in front of Cottonwood Springs, a dusty outpost in the Arizona Territory that looked exactly like the two previous towns that had rejected her, except this one was smaller, meaner, and by the looks of it, even more desperate. It was 1878, and Beatrice had spent her last dollar on this final journey. Twice before she had traveled west as a mail-order bride, and twice she had been sent back east, once for being too educated and once for being too plain-spoken. Now at 24, with no family left in Boston and no prospects, this was truly her last chance. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, not bothering to help her with her battered trunk. "Cottonwood Springs, your party should be waiting." Beatrice smoothed her travel-worn blue dress and pinched color into her cheeks. Her dark hair was pinned neatly beneath her bonnet, but 3 days of travel had left her feeling far from presentable. She peered anxiously around the dusty main street, searching for whoever might be her next prospective husband. No one approached. The driver tossed her trunk unceremoniously to the ground. "Best of luck to you, miss," he said with a skepticism that suggested he thought she'd need it. Beatrice stood alone as the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her in a cloud of dust. The few townsfolk on the street regarded her with curious glances before returning to their business. She felt her heart sinking. Had she been abandoned before even arriving? Miss Vaughn. The deep voice came from behind her. Beatrice turned to find a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin approaching. He wasn't conventionally handsome, with a scar running along his jawline and eyes the color of storm clouds, but there was something compelling about his direct gaze. "I'm Samuel Carson," he said, removing his hat. "My brother Timothy was supposed to meet you, but The man paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "He won't be coming." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "I see, so I am to return east again." She could not keep the tremble from her voice. Samuel Carson shook his head. "No, madam, I've come to take you to the ranch. We can figure things out from there." His words offered little comfort, but Beatrice had no choice. This man, this stranger, was now her only option in a town where she knew no one. She nodded stiffly as he lifted her trunk with ease. "My wagon's over here," he said, leading the way. The ride to the Carson ranch was largely silent. Beatrice watched the landscape change from the dusty town to sprawling rangeland. In the distance, purple mountains rose against the horizon, more beautiful than anything she had ever seen in Massachusetts. "Your brother," she finally ventured. "Has he changed his mind about wanting a wife?" Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. "My brother Timothy has left Cottonwood Springs, for good." "Oh," Beatrice's mind raced with the implications. "Then I suppose I shall have to find employment in town until I can save enough for passage back east." Samuel gave her a sidelong glance. "Miss Vaughn, I should be direct with you. My brother has a habit of making impulsive decisions. Ordering a bride was one of them. Leaving town before you arrived was another. The ranch is in debt and he's run off, leaving me to sort out his mess." Beatrice felt sick. "I see. I'm sorry you've come all this way for nothing, but you're welcome to stay at the ranch for a spell while you figure out your next move. We have a spare room in the main house that's suitable for a lady." "That's very kind, Mr. Carson," he shrugged. "It's the least I can do, considering." They crested a hill, and Beatrice caught her first glimpse of the Carson ranch. It was modest but well kept, with a 2-story main house, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that gave the town its name. In the distance, cattle grazed on the open range. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "It's a lot of work," Samuel replied, but she noticed a hint of pride in his voice. As they approached the house, a woman emerged onto the porch. She was older, with silver threading through her dark hair, and she wore a simple dress with an apron tied around her waist. "That's Mrs. Holloway," Samuel explained. "She helps around the house, lives in town but stays here sometimes when there's extra work." The woman greeted them as Samuel brought the wagon to a stop. "So this is the bride," she said, looking Beatrice over with frank curiosity. "Miss Beatrice Vaughn," Samuel said. "She'll be staying with us temporarily." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose, but she simply nodded. I've prepared the guest room. Come inside, dear, you must be exhausted. Beatrice followed gratefully, aware of Samuel carrying her trunk into the house behind them. The interior was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and clean surfaces. It wasn't fancy, but it was far better than the boarding houses she'd stayed in during her previous attempts at marriage. Dinner will be ready in an hour, Mrs. Holloway said, showing her to a small but pleasant bedroom. You can wash up and rest until then. Left alone, Beatrice sank onto the bed and finally allowed the tears to come. 3 times she had ventured west in search of a new beginning, and 3 times she had failed. What was she to do now? That evening, dinner was a quiet affair. Samuel ate quickly and excused himself to check on a sick calf, leaving Beatrice with Mrs. Holloway, who proved to be surprisingly talkative once her employer had left. So you're the 3rd bride he's brought home, Mrs. Holloway said casually as she poured more coffee. Beatrice nearly choked. Pardon me. Oh, not Mr. Samuel, Mrs. Holloway clarified with a wave of her hand. His brother Timothy. First there was that girl from Chicago, too delicate for ranch life, always complaining about the dust and the heat. Timothy sent her packing within a week. Then came the widow from St. Louis. She took one look at the place and demanded to be taken back to town, never even spent a night here. And now me, Beatrice said quietly, except the prospective groom didn't even bother to stay. Mrs. Holloway studied her. If you don't mind my asking, Miss Vaughn, what made you come west as a mail-order bride? Beatrice hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretense. My parents died of influenza 2 years ago. I worked as a school teacher, but the school closed. I have no family, no money, and few options. Becoming a mail-order bride seemed better than the alternatives. And this isn't your first attempt. No, Beatrice admitted. I was previously matched with a shopkeeper in Nebraska who decided I was too educated for his taste. Then there was a farmer in Kansas who objected to my opinions on women's suffrage. To her surprise, Mrs. Holloway laughed. Well, you won't find Samuel Carson intimidated by an educated woman with opinions. That man could argue politics with the president himself if given half a chance. She paused, giving Beatrice a speculative look. He's a good man, Samuel, nothing like his brother. Beatrice felt herself blushing. Mr. Carson has kindly offered me shelter while I determine my next steps, nothing more. Of course, Mrs. Holloway agreed, but her knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. Over the next few days, Beatrice found herself settling into life at the Carson ranch. With no immediate means to leave, she began to make herself useful, helping Mrs. Holloway with household tasks and taking over the ledgers when she discovered they were in disarray. Samuel seemed surprised when he found her at his desk one afternoon, surrounded by account books. "What are you doing?" he asked, removing his hat as he entered the study. Beatrice looked up, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hope you don't mind. I noticed your books needed organizing and accounting was part of my education." He approached cautiously, looking over her shoulder at the neat columns of figures. "You understand all this?" "Yes. And if I may be frank, Mr. Carson, your brother left your finances in quite a state. You're not as deeply in debt as you might think, but your cash flow is problematic." Instead of being offended, Samuel pulled up a chair beside her. "Show me." For the next hour, Beatrice walked him through the books, explaining where economies could be made and pointing out a mathematical error that had made their situation seem worse than it was. Samuel listened intently, asking intelligent questions and nodding at her suggestions. "Miss Vaughn, you're a godsend," he said finally. "I've been trying to make sense of these books for months. I'm happy to help. It's the least I can do for your hospitality." Their eyes met, and Beatrice felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with accounting. Samuel cleared his throat and stood up abruptly. "I should check on the herd," he said. "Thank you for your help." As he left, Beatrice found herself watching him go, admiring the breadth of his shoulders and the confident way he moved. She quickly chastised herself for the improper thought. That evening, a violent thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. Beatrice was reading in her room when a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the house, followed by the sound of something heavy falling outside. Moments later, there was urgent knocking at her door. "Miss Vaughn," Samuel called. "Lightning's hit the barn. I need your help." She threw on a shawl and hurried downstairs to find Samuel already pulling on his coat. "The horses," he explained. "Lightning struck the oak by the barn and part of the roof is damaged. We need to move them." Without hesitation, Beatrice followed him into the deluge. The rain was coming down in sheets, and lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the barn where smoke was beginning to rise despite the downpour. Inside, the horses were panicking, whinnying and stamping as water poured through a hole in the roof. A small fire had started in the hay loft. "Take this one," Samuel instructed, handing her the reins of a nervous mare. "Lead her to the south corral. I'll get the fire." Beatrice had never handled horses much, but she spoke soothingly to the frightened animal as she led it through the rain to safety. Back and forth they worked, moving horses and salvaging what supplies they could as Samuel fought the small fire with wet blankets. By the time they had finished, both were soaked to the skin and exhausted, but the horses were safe and the fire extinguished. They stood in the rain, looking at the damaged barn roof. "We'll repair it tomorrow," Samuel said, water streaming down his face. "You were brave, Miss Vaughn. Not many city women would have done what you just did." "I'm finding that I'm capable of more than I thought," she replied, suddenly aware of how closely they were standing. Samuel's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then, without warning, he reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, and Beatrice felt her breath catch. "We should get inside before you catch your death," he said softly. That night, lying in her bed listening to the rain, Beatrice realized something had shifted between them. And for the first time since arriving in Cottonwood Springs, she wasn't thinking about leaving. The next morning brought clear skies, and the damage to the barn was less severe than they had feared. Beatrice watched from the porch as Samuel and two ranch hands set about repairs. She had changed into her simplest dress, one that would allow her to help if needed. "He's watching you," Mrs. Holloway said, appearing beside her with a basket of eggs. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Beatrice replied, though she had noticed Samuel's frequent glances in her direction. "That man hasn't looked at a woman that way since before the war," Mrs. Holloway continued, undeterred. "And I've never seen him smile so much as he has these past few days." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "We've merely developed a cordial working relationship." "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Mrs. Holloway chuckled. "Well, whatever it is, it suits you both." Later that day, while helping Samuel organize tools in the repaired barn, Beatrice worked up the courage to ask about his past. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you fought in the war," she said carefully, Samuel's hands stilled on the hammer he was placing on a shelf. "Yes, 4 years with the Union Army, came back in '65, that must have been difficult." He was quiet for so long that Beatrice thought he wouldn't respond. Then softly he said, "It changes a man, makes him see what matters." He turned to face her. "Is that why you're asking, trying to figure out what matters to me?" The directness of his question took her by surprise. "I suppose I'm trying to understand you better, Mr. Carson." "Samuel," he corrected. "After pulling half-burned hay out of my barn together, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" She smiled. "Very well, Samuel." "And what matters to you, Beatrice? What brought you all this way, only to be disappointed twice before?" She considered her answer carefully. "Security at first, a home, but now, I think what matters most is finding a place where I'm valued for who I am, not just what I can provide." "And who are you, Beatrice Vaughn?" "I'm a woman who loves books and numbers, who believes in equality and fair treatment for all. I'm stubborn and outspoken, which has not served me well as a prospective bride, but I'm also loyal and determined, and I work hard for what I believe in." Samuel nodded slowly. "No wonder those fools sent you back. They didn't deserve you." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Before Beatrice could respond, one of the ranch hands called for Samuel from outside. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Of course." But as he reached the door, he turned back. "Beatrice, I'm glad Timothy ran off. I'm glad you're here instead of with him." Then he was gone, leaving her with a fluttering heart and a growing suspicion that she had finally found the place where she belonged. The next week brought a new challenge to the Carson ranch. A cattle buyer arrived from California, offering to purchase a substantial portion of Samuel's herd at a price that would ease their financial concerns. But the negotiations were complex, and the buyer, a slick businessman named Harrington, seemed determined to take advantage of what he perceived as a desperate situation. Beatrice sat quietly in the corner of the study as the men talked, ostensibly organizing papers but listening carefully to every word. When Harrington proposed a price well below market value, citing the ranch's known financial troubles, she could no longer remain silent. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrington," she interrupted, rising from her desk. "But I believe you're operating on outdated information. The Carson Ranch is not in the dire position you seem to think." Both men looked at her in surprise. Samuel's expression was unreadable, but Harrington's showed clear disdain. "Miss," he inquired dismissively. "Vaughn, Beatrice Vaughn, I handle the accounting for the ranch." Harrington smiled condescendingly. "With all due respect, Miss Vaughn, this is a business discussion between men." "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington," she replied evenly, "this is a business discussion about numbers, and numbers are neither male nor female." She stepped forward, placing a ledger on the desk between them. "Perhaps you'd care to review our current financial standing before continuing your negotiations." Samuel's lips twitched with what might have been a suppressed smile. "Miss Vaughn has reorganized our accounts. I trust her assessment completely." Harrington reluctantly reviewed the figures Beatrice presented, his expression souring as he realized his leverage was not as strong as he had believed. By the end of the meeting, he had agreed to a price much closer to what Samuel had originally proposed. After showing the buyer out, Samuel returned to the study where Beatrice waited anxiously. "I apologize if I overstepped," she said immediately. "I couldn't bear to see him taking advantage." "Overstepped," Samuel interrupted, breaking into a genuine smile. "Beatrice, you just saved this ranch about $2,000. That's not overstepping, that's a miracle." Relief washed over her. "You're not angry that I spoke out." "Angry, I'm impressed and grateful." He moved closer, his expression growing serious. "You've brought something to this ranch that it's been missing for a long time. Efficiency, yes, but also life, spirit." "I've only been doing what needs to be done," she demurred. "No," Samuel said softly, "you've done much more than that." He hesitated, then added, "I received a letter yesterday from Timothy." Beatrice felt her stomach drop. "Oh, he's in California. Says he's sorry for the trouble he caused, leaving you stranded here." Samuel's eyes never left hers. "He asked if you needed money to return east." "I see." Beatrice struggled to keep her voice steady. "And what did you tell him?" "I haven't replied yet. I wanted to ask you first." Samuel took a deep breath. "Do you want to leave, Beatrice?" The question hung between them, weighted with all the things they hadn't yet said. Beatrice looked around the study where she had spent so many hours working alongside Samuel, thinking of the meals they had shared, the easy conversations, the way he listened to her ideas as if they mattered. "No," she said finally. "I don't want to leave." Relief flooded Samuel's features. "Good. Because I don't want you to go." He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. His touch was warm and solid, like the man himself. "Beatrice, I know this isn't what you came west for. You came to be Timothy's wife, not to work as my accountant, but these past weeks, I've come to care for you deeply." "Samuel, let me finish, please. I'm not offering you a position on the ranch. I'm offering you, well, me. If you'll have me, I know it's sudden and I'm not the man you expected to meet when you arrived. I'm older, I'm scarred, I'm stubborn as a mule, according to Mrs. Holloway." "Samuel," Beatrice interrupted gently, placing her free hand against his cheek. "You're exactly the man I had hoped to find, even if I didn't know it until I met you." His eyes searched hers. "Does that mean—" "It means yes," she whispered. "Yes to whatever you're asking." Samuel's smile was blinding as he pulled her into his arms. "I'm asking you to stay, not as my accountant or my brother's discarded bride, but as my wife, if you'll have me." Beatrice's heart soared. "I will." Their first kiss was tender and sweet, a promise of the life they would build together. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the town of Silverdale, some 50 miles away. It was addressed to Beatrice, and the contents made her gasp. "What is it?" Samuel asked, concerned by her expression. It's from a school board. They're offering me a teaching position. She looked up, conflicted. I wrote to several towns when I first arrived before we, Samuel took the letter, reading it quickly. It's a good offer. Yes, but I don't want to leave this. She gestured around them at the home they were beginning to build together. Samuel was quiet for a moment, thinking. Cottonwood Springs doesn't have a proper school, he said finally. Just Mrs. Patterson teaching the young ones in her front room. The town's growing, though. Beatrice stared at him. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the future Mrs. Carson might consider opening a school here instead of Silverdale. We have that old bunkhouse that could be converted. And I happen to know several families who would pay good money for their children to be taught by a proper Boston-educated teacher. You would do that? Help me start a school? Samuel took her hands in his. Beatrice, I want you to be happy here. If teaching is your passion, then by God you should teach. Besides, he added with a smile, I'm quite looking forward to having the smartest wife in the territory. 3 months later, Samuel and Beatrice were married in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The guest list included most of Cottonwood Springs, all curious to see the mail-order bride who had been rejected twice only to find love with the most respected rancher in the county. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and celebrated, Samuel pulled his new wife aside for a moment of privacy. Happy, Mrs. Carson? He asked, his arms around her waist. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. Though I still can't believe how everything turned out. I can, Samuel's voice was firm. From the moment I saw you standing alone by that stagecoach, I knew you were something special. Those other men were fools to send you away. Their loss is my gain, she teased. Samuel's expression grew serious. I want you to know something, Beatrice. You're not just my wife, you're my partner in everything. This ranch, the school you're building, our future, it's all ours together. I know, she said softly. That's why I love you. He kissed her then, heedless of the nearby guests. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers and whispered, You're never leaving my side again. Is that a promise or a threat, Mr. Carson? She asked with a smile. Both, he replied, his eyes crinkling with happiness. Definitely both. 1 year later, the Cottonwood Springs School welcomed its first 20 students. Beatrice Carson stood proudly at the door of the converted bunkhouse, now a bright and airy classroom filled with desks Samuel had built himself. The ranch was thriving under their joint management. Samuel handled the cattle and land while Beatrice managed the books and now the school. Their partnership had proven even more successful than either could have imagined. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, Samuel reached for his wife's hand. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Beatrice unwrapped it to find a beautiful silver locket. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of the two of them taken on their wedding day. Samuel, it's beautiful, she breathed. Open the other side, he urged. She did, finding a lock of very fine, dark hair. For the future, Samuel explained, his voice thick with emotion as he placed his hand gently on her rounded belly. For our child. Tears filled Beatrice's eyes as she leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. I never thought I could be this happy. You deserve all the happiness in the world, he murmured against her hair, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they had made their own, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Twice rejected, nearly defeated, she had found not just a husband but a true partner, a love deeper than she had ever dared to hope for. What are you thinking about? Samuel asked, noticing her contemplative expression. I'm thinking about how sometimes the wrong beginnings lead to the right endings, she replied, and how grateful I am that your brother Timothy was such a poor correspondent. Samuel laughed, the sound warm in the gathering dusk. I'll drink to that. He raised his coffee cup in a toast, to mail-order brides who find their way home, even when the map leads them astray. And to the men wise enough to recognize a treasure when it lands on their doorstep, Beatrice added. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel and Beatrice Carson sat together. Hands entwined, Watching over the land and life, they had built a life neither had expected but both had desperately needed. And in the quiet of the evening, with the promise of their future growing between them, they knew with absolute certainty that they had finally found where they belonged. Together.